Okay. Hi, Tina. How are you?
I'm super. How are you? Thanks, Douglas.
Doing fine, thank you. As we were just talking about before we got on, you are in Australia, in Melbourne, you
I
said,
am.
right? So,
Absolutely.
again, thank you for getting up so early. I know it's early in
That's
the
fine.
morning.
I'm usually an early person, so it works well.
Okay. Well, and I think it's kind of relevant to the topic we're going to be talking about, which is remote working. Is that correct?
That's right. Absolutely.
Now, I've been working, oddly enough, I've been working remote with my producer who is in Boston since 2015. But remote working really came into, I suppose, necessity during COVID. Yeah, and everybody started to work remotely more so than maybe they were doing before. I think it sort of amplified the need for it or the benefit to it.
Yeah, absolutely. My view is before COVID, there were very few people who were working from home, and often, particularly in large corporate organizations, who I work with, often people had to get permission from their leader to be able to work from home, which to me always seemed like a really strange thing because you're working and it should be about what you're doing, not where you're actually doing it from. But similar to you actually, Douglas, I started working from home only one day a week here and there it was about 15 years ago when most people didn't do it back then. But the story of how I actually did it is quite interesting because I had a large job. So I was 29 years old and I was here in Melbourne, Australia, and I was leading a lot of contact centres. So I led a department of about 400 people. And my job just involved back to back meetings in the office. And I'd often get a couple of hundred emails a day. And whenever I had a break from my meetings, we were in an open plan office. And open plan was seen as this is the best way to work where people can drop by your desk all the time. So that's what happened. So for me, when I had a break from my meetings, I'd come back to my desk in this open plan office and I'd sit down and there'd be a queue of people at my desk just wanting 5 minutes, just wanting 2 minutes of my time. And I found that I never had time to actually get my work done properly. And so one day I was feeling just really overwhelmed and I thought, you know what? I'm going to work from home tomorrow. And this is in the back in the days of dial up. We didn't have smartphones then. And so people really couldn't contact me, but I could go through my inbox. I could go through the work that I felt was the most important to me. And that day was the most productive day I'd had up until that time in my corporate career. And I realized, wow, this is actually a great thing to remove myself from the office every now and again. I can actually be more productive and have focus time. And so from that, I actually came up with this term, outcomes over hours in the office, and realizing we don't have to all be in the office together all the time. And so I started leading in that way, and my teams embraced it because for them it meant flexibility and they could do things a little bit more on their terms. So it was something, it seems, that you and I, Douglas, way before many people were forced to do it who'd never done it before, we got to see actually there can be a lot of benefits from working outside the office. But to your point, a lot of people had never worked from home before when COVID hit. And so it really was a stress point for a lot of leaders and a lot of companies where they were having to lead when they were so used to having their people in front of them in the office and having to change their leadership style so that they could lead their people effectively, even when they couldn't see them face to face in person all the time. So it was a massive, massive shift for corporate organizations.
Well, so is that what you're doing? Is basically helping corporations to make this transition to virtual versus having everybody there in person?
Absolutely. So my view, it really comes to that outcomes over hours in the office. And so hybrid working or remote working is absolutely a part of it. And it's really around how do you, as a leader, inspire your team to achieve extraordinary outcomes, but also to do it without burnout. Because the studies absolutely show that during the pandemic, where people were forced to work from home, those boundaries between work and home life absolutely blurred because people were in the same physical environment. So there's a lot of things. It's not just about how do you have an effective meeting via a video. It's so much more holistic than that in terms of thinking, how can you be effective and work on the right things? How can you be efficient and think about things such as collaboration? But also, how can you look after yourself? Because we know that with people working from home or somewhere else and those boundaries being blurred, there's a lot more things to consider, both as an employee as well as someone looking after others. It was interesting. I was chatting with a client yesterday, and as they said to me, yeah, it feels like I'm going into other people's homes right now. We're getting to see another side of people, which before they could just shut off, where they'd leave their home, they'd go into the office. Now it's, once again, the lines are a lot more blurred. And as a leader, there's those little things that you need to consider. And they're the sorts of things that I teach to corporate leadership teams around the world.
Well, it was funny when you mentioned that because there was this one sort of viral video that went out of somebody fairly famous on ABC News or CBS, I forget which one, and she was
Yeah.
sitting there trying to do a report, and her husband just walked by in his underwear in
Yep.
front of the camera. Do you remember that one?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's happened so much. I had my own version that happened where it was early days of my business. So I've been doing this since just before the pandemic hit. And here in Australia, there was one of the top 20 companies here who I really, really wanted to work with. And so we were on a Zoom call, and I was sitting there. And so I was at home. I was sitting very professionally, meeting this person, Diana, and having a conversation with her. And my daughter, who was 10 at the time, came in and had made me a paper crown. And she put this paper crown on my head. And I'm
Oh,
thinking, really? Of all the times you had to come in during this meeting. But it was interesting, though, because in that moment, I realized I had a choice. I had a choice that I could push Eliza out of the way and pretended that I don't have kids, or I could embrace the mess, embrace what was happening, and just be real and authentic with Di about what was happening. So I took a deep breath and I said to her, Di, this is Eliza. They had a chat for 30 seconds and then Eliza went off. But the other thing was Eliza was wearing a giraffe onesie, so this costume looking like a giraffe. And so she went off. And a couple of minutes later, I could see that Di was putting me on mute and she was turning to the side. And I'm thinking, oh, what's she doing? And then I said, oh, Di, do you have someone at your end who wants to meet me? And she said to me, I see your giraffe and I raise you one lion. And her 11-year-old son came onto the camera and we had a chat. Now, in that moment of this vulnerability, I guess, our relationship went from here to here
yeah,
because we'd
exactly.
just been open with each other. And so we had this wonderful conversation around, how are you going with your kids' remote learning at home while you're trying to get your work done? And we got to explore all these other topics that we wouldn't have done if we had just been the very professional person who was on the call that day.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I can think of 1,000 positive reasons why people should work remotely. The biggest ones is commuting time,
Yep.
traffic, and then for the company owner, not having to rent expensive real estate for everybody to gather. Are there any negatives?
Yeah, absolutely. Like with most things, there are two sides. And so preferences come into it. So, one thing I would say, Douglas, is it's not a one size fits all. So, even when you mentioned commuting before, it's interesting. In one of my group coaching programs, we were talking about commuting. And yes, it is the top reason that most people don't want to go into the office. But one of the leaders was sitting there and said, I hate commuting. It's the worst part of my day. It's 45 minutes. I've got to get on the train along with everyone else. I really don't like it. But it was really interesting because the next leader said, really? I love it. It's my favorite part of the day. I get me time. I go from the chaos of my home And before I get into the office where everyone wants to be able to see me and to take my time, I get me time. I get this time where I get to listen to a podcast or music or read a book, and I love that. So it's even interesting that in some things that people think, okay, this is one of the things that mean that people want to work from home. For a certain percentage of people, it can be the reason they actually want to go into the office. But to answer your question about, well, what is it for the office that people like? There is nothing that meets face-to-face interaction. And so it does. I think the key thing though to realize is it doesn't have to be every day, but we absolutely know that when you can be together, that collaboration and communication can absolutely go from here to here when you are together in the office. And things such as innovating together, being able to stick things up on the wall and move them around, to have tough conversations, to be able to do team building. A lot of it is so much more powerful when it is done face to face. And the other thing that, and this is one of the real challenges that leaders really need to think through, and I think is a real blind spot when people are not in the office, is about career development. And that is for themselves as well as for their teams. Because for a lot of us, so I'm about to turn 47, and so I've grown up for the last 25 years in corporate, being able to see other leaders real time in real life and how they act. And you learn a lot from that. You learn what you love and what you want to role model, but you also learn from leaders that you think, I don't ever want to behave how they did. I saw how it made someone feel. And so you get to learn these things being in an office that is a lot harder. It's not impossible, but it's a lot harder to do when you're working from home via a screen. So that's where a lot of companies are saying hybrid is a really great thing. Hybrid just meaning that there are guardrails where people can work from home a bit or from anywhere, and they can also work from the office a bit. And I do think that having both is the best of both worlds.
What do you think is the percentage of people who can actually work from home? Because obviously there are certain jobs
Yep,
that no way, police officers,
absolutely.
firefighter, they have to be there.
Yeah, it's a great point, Douglas. And the teams that I work with are those that I refer to as knowledge workers, because you're right, not every role makes sense to be able to say, yes, you can work from home. So you mentioned a couple there. I work with a large company here in Australia where they have people who fix the roads as well. So you have some roles, what I refer to as the knowledge workers, whether they work in marketing or finance, HR, technology, where they can work from anywhere. But if you need to fix a road, you actually physically need to be there to do that. So it's a really important distinction that not all roles do make sense to say you can hybrid work. And most organizations have got their heads around that, and to be able to work through, well, what's the type of work that is happening? If someone's working in retail in a shop, that's where they need to be, for example.
Well, that's true. Although even retail is slowly creeping online,
Oh,
where
absolutely.
brick and mortar storefronts may not make sense in 10 or 15 years. Hard to say.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one to watch. My view is, once again, face-to-face connection. There is absolutely a large percentage of the population who love to have that in-store shopping experience. So the thing of online, it's convenient for a lot of people, including myself, but the experience is something that a lot of people still do crave to have. So it'll be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I think for me, clothes is the only thing I don't like buying online because I want to see it, I want to try them on before I buy them. And you
Yeah,
don't have that privilege
I'm
when
happy
you're.
buying everything online. So I'm one extreme.
We've got just about a minute left, and I want to mention your book. Your book is called Effective Remote Teams. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, and basically the book covers what we've been talking about. And who is the book designed for? Is it designed for CEOs?
CEOs and senior leaders in large organizations. So I interviewed a lot of CEOs, C suite members, and I asked them one question: what are the 2 to 3 skills that you believe leaders need to be able to lead their teams effectively in our new normal where we're not in the office the whole time. And so I share their insights as well as from my group coaching program, Outcomes Over Hours, how you can be effective, efficient, and energetic.
Do you do your coaching online or in person?
Mine is 99% online. So my clients are all around the world.
Oh, that's
And that's
perfect.
been a wonderful thing of the world for me's got a lot smaller, a lot more accessible through the pandemic. So my clients are on 6 continents. So haven't got to Antarctica yet.
How many big corporations are in Antarctica? Probably not that many, are they?
Yeah, I don't think the penguins need me yet.
No, I think they're doing just fine on their own. Well, Tina, we do have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Absolutely. It's effectiveremoteteams.com.
Okay, great. And people can find out about your book there and about you and what you do. Yeah.
Yeah, they can get a free report on the top 10 mistakes leaders make and to the things to consider. And they can also get my book there as well.
All right, great. Well, again, thank you for getting up so early. It was nice meeting you, and best of luck with your book and what you're doing. I hope everything goes well for you.